think so. It's just. Yeah. Oh, it's like twitching. All right. Wayne, could you open us up a word of prayer? Amen. Can you bring them to me? No. Don't hand them out. You guys start answering the crossword puzzles and. All right. No. Good to see everybody here. So we are talking about the signs, the wonders, the miracles, the things that were done. And last week, I'd asked the question about if anyone was familiar with the minimal facts argument. And if I recall correctly, nobody really was. And so I wanted to share it with you. If you ever had a conversation with a person and they're not likely to look at the Bible as inspired. Has anyone ever had a conversation with someone and you attempt to point to the Bible and like, well, I don't see that as an authority, right? Well, the minimal facts argument is a line of reasoning that was developed by two guys. The one in particular that I know offhand is Gary Habermas. And it's a way of talking about the resurrection. And the benefit of it is it allows you to talk about it from a standpoint that a person who is a skeptic will hear. That we're not starting from the standpoint that the Bible is inspired, that it's inerrant. You're not starting from there. Because one, they wouldn't necessarily grant you that. But you're starting from the standpoint that the Bible is historical documents. These are writings that we have multiple copies of that go back. And so I'd like to present the idea to you, the argument to you, because not only will it help you in terms of talking to those who are skeptics, but it can also help you in terms of dealing with some of the responses people may have regarding the resurrection. All right. Any preliminary questions before we begin? Okay. All right. So Habermas had two filters. The first filter was looking at evidence, what they call is evidentiary strength. Looking at evidence, basically, that's more than one source. He says, I want to look at the resurrection. And I want to look at all the evidence that's out there. And so I want to look at the evidence where there's at least more than just one person saying it. There might be people who are for it. There might be those who are against it. There might be those who are not interested in the veracity of it, but they still comment on it. He says, I want to see multiple leads of information. The other idea, the second filter, was the idea of consensus. Is that you spell consensus? IOUS? Okay. IOUS. Okay. And here what he was doing is like, I want to look at all the people who talk about the resurrection, who've made talks on it, who are credentialed, people who have studied this, have looked into it, have gathered all the research. And I don't care if they're atheists, if they're skeptics, if they're pro, if they're against. I just want to see what they've said, right? And so he gathers all of this data in one big thing. And then he starts to sort it as to, of the information out there, what is the smallest amount that everyone will agree to? Right? Everybody's have all these ideas, but if I look at just the evidence that has more than one source, and there's a number of people who will agree to it, even though their backgrounds might be different, what are the smallest parts, right? The minimal amount, right? What is that? Okay. So have that in your mind. Here's the other thing that was interesting in terms of his research. When we talk about the resurrection of Jesus, how do we typically talk about it? How was he, when you describe his resurrection, what are some of the terms we talk about it to help us understand what it was like? So miraculous, probably the origination of it. Was he a spirit? All right. So he was corporeal, he had a body, had physicality to it. He ate, right? Okay. And so we talk about it as a bodily resurrection. Okay. What time period did this occur historically? First century. All right? In the research that Habermas was doing, I think also N.T. Wright shows us as well. But in the first century, the Roman Greco mindset didn't have the idea of a bodily resurrection, a person bodily being resurrected. They had the idea of aspirations, right? Vestiges of the deceased, kind of spirits. What's funny is I saw this. I have these things on. I thought I had my glasses on, and I don't. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I saw this. This kind of gives you the idea of how they viewed death. This was something that was often put on tombstones or the crypts, I guess. So, and it was a Latin phrase. I can't read it in Latin. Okay. It was, I was not, I was, I am not, I don't care.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? So that was their mentality. When you talk about some of the philosophies, the Stoics, Epicureans, the Platonians, was the idea that the physical flesh was something to be escaped. Right? The Jews believed in a resurrection, but it wasn't personal. That the resurrection was going to happen at one point in the future for everyone. Remember what Martha said to Jesus about Lazarus when he says he's going to live again? She said, I know he will in the resurrection. She's like, and so the Jews had an idea of a resurrection, but it was everybody in the future. Correctly, the Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection. All right. And so think about that in the first century, if you were going to talk about someone coming back from the dead, this was a mindset that you would pull from. Right? Is this the idea that we have with Jesus? Right? And so you begin to see that when we start talking about Jesus, he's outside of what they would even imagine happening. Okay. So, okay. And so now we look at what are the sometimes you'll see it as 5 plus 1. We'll get to the last one. Things. Okay. So when he was looking at all this information and said, okay, what are the ones that people will agree with? The first one is that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. Right? So if we were to say that he died by crucifixion, what are some of the sources we would reference? All right? There's Tacitus. Right? Tacitus in his Annals talks about it. What else would we use?
Josephus?
We could use Josephus, the Jewish historian. He mentions it. Now remember what we're starting with. That we're looking at the Bible not as inspired, but as a record of first century historical documents. So you've got the gospel accounts. Right? You got Paul's writings. And so for all the skeptics, all the believers, all the things, when they looked at all the evidence, they say, okay, we'll grant you that. There was a cross. Right? Jesus died by crucifixion by the Romans. Right? Does anybody know why this fact that it was crossed by the Romans is important? Say it again. Is there, what can you think would be a benefit, if I can say that term, of talking about crucifixion and having the Romans being the ones who did it? Right? They did not fail. They were not sold out. Right? If this was their duty, that's what they did. Disimpassioned. Right? Okay. Another one. We'll call this risen. is that with the disciples, and here's how it is said. The disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. Not that they simply believed Jesus was risen, but they had experiences that they believed that he was risen. Right? You see the difference?
So this larger group is accepting that the disciples had an experience, not necessarily agreeing that Christ rose.
Exactly. They say something happened, they believed it. Right? And so this idea of the disciples' experience. One of the sources of information about this is in 1 Corinthians 15, in verse 3. This is a letter Paul wrote to the church of Corinth. And he says, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at a time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me." This early first part is often viewed as kind of like an early creed, that when Paul came around, this was already something that was accepted, something that was already being said. Right? So there's a short period of time where he's on the cross, dies, and then this is going out. There's not a long period of hundreds of years for a myth to create. It's pretty rapid succession. All right? Right? Next one is that the disciples' lives were overturned. And this will be a mnemonic device. But they had this experience, and then there is a drastic change in the disciples' lives. That the men who scattered at the arrest became public witnesses. They accepted danger, several documented cases of death rather than recant. And so this establishes sincerity, not truth. Right? So their lives were changed. Not only did they have this experience, but these same guys who ran away are now in the city of Jerusalem giving testimony, preaching. They're willing to be beheaded. They're willing to be incarcerated. They're willing to do all these things. And so, if they had lied, because here's the thing, sometimes people will go to those extremes for a lie. History is full of people who have believed things in error, who have given themselves to it. But here, you would have to say that not only did they knowingly make the lie up, but they held to it in the face of the persecution, in the face of the person of death. And so some people will die for a lie they believe. Rarely anybody will die for a lie they made up. All right? Skeptic James, brother of Jesus, was converted. Right? In John 7:5. We have the apostle, can you read this? Saying that for not even his brothers believed in him. Right? Historical document making this claim. You have that reference to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 of James. And you have Josephus, the Jewish historian, talking about James being executed for his faith. And so here you have a person who was initially a skeptic, completely changed. The next S. You have a sworn enemy. Right? You might say, James, well, he was a brother. Just felt bad. Okay. You got a sworn enemy, Saul, who has the bona fides of the background of Judaism, and yet we have the idea that something happened to him and he's changed, and now he is a preacher for what he was condemning. A violent opponent of the church, reversed course on the basis of what he took to be an encounter with the risen Christ. He says that in Galatians chapter 1. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. Right? We're just looking at this as a historical document. He makes this claim. Whereas you would see James grieving Jesus. Oh, I see Jesus, my brother. Paul's persecuting the church. And yet, there's a change in him. And then the last one, usually the +1, is the empty tomb. The reason he puts it as a +1 is because in his, I guess his sorting, he said that 75% will grant you the empty tomb. Those who don't will sometimes say that the Romans didn't bury criminals who were crucified, or the idea he was tossed in an open grave, right? And so when you look at these things that people agree to, you have to ask the question. Oh, go ahead. So I don't have the specifics, but I do recall a reference to, I want to say it was some Chinese annals that were written that talk about a celestial event, but the hesitancy I will have is I don't know if that is a reference to the star that was there, or if it's a reference to the blotting of the sun. I will see if I can find that information. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then the idea is like, how would those other places have explained it? But I'll see if I can find that information that I'm thinking I came across. But even still, with this information, right? So the question becomes is, what answer will solve all of these data points, right? Now, people have attempted to explain away the resurrection, and maybe you've heard some of the ideas, or maybe you can share some of the ideas you've heard. If someone says he wasn't resurrected, okay, not dead, right? This is called the swoon theory. He just appeared dead, right? I think Islam, this is in their Quran, he didn't actually die. All right, so not dead. What are some other ideas people will use?
He was stolen.
Okay, body stolen. Okay. Apostles lied. Just a legend, right? It's myth, generations just being told more and more.
One idea could be that Pilate hid him away and didn't actually have him executed. Because Pilate did find no fault in him, so he could have done that.
Different. Prisoner, I guess. Okay. That would, or a different tomb, right? The tomb they went to, oh, it was a different one. Okay. All right. So, let's take these and see which one it answers, and see if it answers all of them. All right? He wasn't dead. All right? Would that fit this one?
I don't think they would really fail at crucifixion.
Textually, what does it tell us about his death on the cross? They went and checked. And how do we know he'd already died? Well, the piercing in the side definitely would.
They didn't break his leg because he was already.
Didn't break his leg because he was already dead.
I think there's some medical thing too with the blood and water.
Coming out. And then also, Pilate was surprised. Right? Okay. So, he was dead. Right? And even if he wasn't dead, then you have this idea of Saul. What was his experience if he was still living? Right? Or the empty tomb. I mean, because you think about it, it's like if he were beaten and bruised that much, would he have been able to overcome the sentries that are outside, push the stone away? Right? Okay. Body was stolen.
You had to realize those Roman soldiers there, this is a penalty of death. They were sent there to make sure that did not happen. And it happened.
Yeah. Because then you have the question, okay, the body was stolen, and you have generally two possibilities. The disciples or the Jews, right? You kind of answered the first one. If it was the disciples, how are they going to overcome Romans? And then, are they willing to be completely different, saying he's resurrected when they know he's alive? Or would Paul be converted? Right? If he was stolen by the Jews, what problem does that have?
That'd be defeating their purpose.
right? If they're changing and said we saw him, like, no, he's right here. Here's the body. All right.
They were the ones saying disciples.
Yeah. And then we have the idea that the apostles were lying.
A lot of lying to keep up with.
Over time.
They're willing to die, so it don't make sense.
Yeah.
Facts.
Yeah. Or Paul.
Or why would James be converted over a lie?
Yeah. Or, the empty tomb. You got to explain that.
And I apologize, I know I missed the first few minutes of class. But is the idea here to help us be able to answer arguments that people have against the miracles by knowing these 5 plus 1 facts?
Good question. The idea is twofold. One, having a framework where you can talk to another person about the resurrection in a way that doesn't have you say, well, the Bible says it. Because the skeptic's not going to accept that. But if you say, we've got historical evidence, historical documents, if you just treat the New Testament as actual documents, and we've got multiple sources that make these claims. And so that's the first aspect. In knowing this, you will also be able to address some of the common pushback or ideas people have.
So, but that depends on them falling into those beliefs, right?
So the idea that he died on the cross,
It's generally accepted by most folks, right?
the people who study it, the scholars, the pros, the atheists, the skeptics, yes, we agree. We've got Tacitus who mentions it. We've got Josephus who records it. We've got the gospel accounts that list it.
But the conversation depends on Joe next door also agreeing to it, right?
That's why you have the sources.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if they say, well, I don't believe that he died on the cross, you would say, well, here's the evidence that I would say supports it. What evidence do you have that's counter to that? The idea is to take it and put it in a way that we can say, well, here are some things that people who've looked into it, people who have no skin in the game, will still agree, right? Because here's the big thing. Oftentimes, it's not whether this happened, it's the implication if it did. It's not necessarily the fact that he came back, it's, well, what does that mean? And that's sometimes the one that's harder to get over. But if you can say, here's some basic facts that if you look, people agree with, how do we set these all together? How do we get this mosaic to make one big coherent picture? Because what will happen is a person will say, well, I don't think he actually died. And they say, okay, he didn't do that. So I don't have to explain any other stuff. And you're like, no. But there's other pieces to the puzzle. If he didn't die, then you've got to figure out, well, what does that mean about what Josephus knew or this Roman historian wrote about who had no reason to lie. And so the idea is not only a framework to be able to talk about it, but also to understand here are some of the common things you will hear, and once you have these, you think, okay, that's not going to fit. It won't work. And so we have the idea that it was a legend, right? That he died, and then they were grieving, and then after a while they said, oh, no, I really saw him, and he rose. Next generation, oh yeah, I heard that too, and then it just grew as a legend. right? We have stories that happen like that in our culture. Abraham Lincoln, right? Could he really have done all those amazing things people talk about him doing? I don't know. Some grow, some change. And they say maybe the thing with Jesus. But you have people who are there in the same place it happened, being changed. Right? You have the creed that was happening in that first century. Right? So this wasn't something that took a long time to be believed. It was accepted almost immediately. Different prisoner, right? This would be kind of the same thing as maybe not died or the body stolen. If it's a different prisoner, easy way for the Romans to quell that growing Christian group. Here's Jesus, right? Then you have the idea of like, we have people who saw him on the cross, who knew he was there. And so the idea of a different tomb, okay, you have a different tomb, but that doesn't explain the idea they all had the same experience, or how James or Paul were changed or converted. And so, can you see how, if you just take one of these, you can see how they might explain one thing, but not at all. Right? Another one that's common is the idea of mass hallucination. All right, someone says, okay, they all hallucinated it. What would you say to that?
And then they kept for days and you know, because he was on the earth and he was seen by all those other people. That meant everyone would have to keep.
Well, and Saul was quite a bit after the fact.
Saul was after the fact. You have the idea of like mass hallucinations of all the same thing.
Well,
The
Jesus
same.
had already risen, he had already ascended into heaven when he said, okay, Paul,
Yeah.
enough is enough, and we're gonna have to come to Jesus.
Yeah. Well, not only that is, if it was a hallucination, then that would mean what about Jesus' death and body?
That they would have been too.
There would have been a tomb. Would have been there, right? And why didn't they find that?
It's like a mass hallucination. They all have to have something in common. Everybody has to eat the same thing or eat the same thing, get a gas or something.
Some sort of psychotropic, something that would have caused it possibly. And here you have, it's all over the place, right?
And in different times.
Different time periods.
That was the easy one to explain away.
But what you'll find is a lot of these explanations people will hold thinking that they solve the entire problem. And if you can say, it's like, well, even if I granted you that, it doesn't explain this other stuff that has to fit.
I recently heard, I've never heard this before, recently had a gentleman say that the Catholic Church wrote in, like changed the narrative. And they were adding in, extra facts and stuff. He didn't go into any details, so I was like, what?
Yeah.
That Catholic Church made it up. I thought, okay.
Made
Where that came from.
made up the resurrection, or
Well, made up, but like added a bunch of stuff to convince the common man that this, that it happened.
okay. And so then Then you have the same thing, kind of the explanation of, well, what about the historians or the evidence that's not based on Christian scripture? Not only that, but when we did the whole manuscript evidence, like it goes back even further.
Yeah, because it's meant, I mean, he's mentioned in Isaiah, he's mentioned in the Old Testament that they all, you know, they were all on one page, believing in, you know, the Old Testament that was already around, had been around. That's where the Jews just missed it. They missed that. They didn't flip the switch.
Yeah. Yeah, for a good portion of them, for sure. Right. Any questions or thoughts this far?
You know what, all of this, the evidence, everything that we looked at tonight, we're talking about the different things, this strengthens our faith. But if a person has absolutely no faith, and they're voicing their disagreement because I don't have any faith that this ever really happened, this is a story that was told, and we can sit there and tell them this, by Josephus and the Gospels and Paul and stuff, and talk to them about it, and, cause I've talked to some that just, you can talk till you're blue in the face.
Yeah.
They just don't have the faith that it takes to trust in the Lord. I always end up going back to, how are we here? Creation.
Yeah.
God is almighty, you know, and he had this plan, and even in that, they don't even discuss that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that, but, you know, your faith is what this is all about.
Well, and I've had experiences similar to that, where it becomes, well, I'll give you this idea. Sometimes when I'm talking to a person who's an atheist, I have to settle in my mind first. Are they an atheist for rational reasons or emotional reasons? Because sometimes I had one article, I remember cutting this out, I don't know how many years ago, where it was just a random interview of a musician who said, I stopped believing in God when I saw my dad take a hammer to my mom. Saw that as a child. Right? Understandable. And so argumentation may not be the most persuasive. There's something different.
The world famous atheist that decided they was going to prove it wrong, and studied and ended up being baptized and converting into Christianity. But I know that this happened.
I don't know offhand.
Clayton, there you go.
Oh, was it?
What about that woman that was an atheist? Didn't she, whatever her name was, didn't she convert?
No, I think they found her in a barrel of something. I think she yeah. You say, Wayne?
Who was it that Jesus showed the scars in his hands through?
Thomas?
Do we know whether those scars had healed, or were they still bloody, or did they have scabs, or what would be the nature?
Thomas put his fingers through it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if he actually did or if he saw them, because I don't know if he, where is that, into John? Yeah, and I don't think he said, my God, my Lord, or my Lord, my God.
I think he invited him to do it. But
Yeah.
I don't think he did it.
Yeah, he says, unless I see his hands and the marks of the nails, place my finger in the nails, place my hand into his side, I'll never believe. And then Jesus says, you know, put your finger here, do my hands. He goes, my Lord, my God, have you believed because you've seen me?
If you're resurrected, you gotta be healed, so there were scars, there wasn't bloody holes in his hands, they had
Yeah.
scabbed over and healed.
Human healings.
Yeah.
Was he human at that point?
Well, this is where he was eating.
Yeah, but I'm just talking about for life.
Yeah. But back to your point in terms of the discussion with the person, is there is some aspect of understanding that sometimes a person's hesitation has some more baggage to it, some history to it, and being sensitive to that. But the weight of this argument is for those who see themselves as rational, see themselves of, well, I don't believe in Christianity because it's fairy tales and it's made up. And you're basically saying, okay, if we gathered historical information and we set it down, here are the things that people basically said, here's the stuff that happened. And so what is the best explanation to explain it? And the one that answers all of them is that he was resurrected. Now, even if I don't talk about the implication of that in terms of what it means for who he is and what he said and all that, even if that's not even dealt with, it's still the most compelling explanation for the evidence and the facts that are there. But kind of like you said, is sometimes you'll have a conversation with a person and you just got to figure out, okay, are we discussing this, or am I coming up against some sort of past issue that has to be worked through? Because that is sometimes the case.